We are both live here in person as well as webcasting this event. So we have a lot of people may not be able to attend. So I think it's going to be good. I'll pass it on to Valerie to talk today.
Hi, I'm Dr. Valerie from the Thailand, and we're very happy to be able to get Dave here to come and speak to our university and globally on via webcasting. Dave is quite a reputable character out there in the world of MOOCs and Open Ed and rhizomatic learning, which is one of his major points of focus right now. If you haven't spent some time thinking about it, you can learn a lot about Dave through just a YouTube search. So I really am pleased that we have him here today to share some ideas about next steps, opportunities, and impact of EdTech on higher ed. So thank you very much for taking the time to come over and join us. Appreciate it.
Thanks. I'm going to try without the mic. Can you guys hear me well enough from here and that? You're good? And thanks for inviting me out, actually. I was just over in Vancouver, and when Valerie found out, she said, why don't you just come over? We'll have a little chat, maybe have a meeting in the morning or something. And a lot of you clearly know Valerie, because that turned into about 8 hours of the day. And it's been really great. It's actually 9. But it's been really great. Already this morning I've had a chance to meet some people, have a chat, and get a sense for what makes the university tick. And that, for me, is a really exciting opportunity. So coming here today and getting a chance to talk to you guys, and hopefully talk with you guys, because hopefully we'll have a little bit of engagement back and forth here, about what EdTech is doing in higher ed. And it's, it's impact and opportunity. And that first word, impact, isn't necessarily the totally awesome, perfect impact either. There are some things that are happening with educational technology that are making some potential changes that we're going to have to face. There are challenges out there that we're going to have to do something about as institutions. The opportunities are there as well, and they're there not so much in the technologies themselves, but in how we decide to use them. And that's some of the talk that we're going to have today, is a little bit about how those trends are out there, what trends are affecting higher ed, and how the technology weaves together with them, and then how we can make, hopefully, some good decisions about what we can do with those. I'm Dave Cormier. For those of you who don't know, I started using educational technologies about 10 years ago, where I had 270 writing students, and I have the organizational skills of a small rodent. So I take kind of paper and I chew it up and I put it in the corner, and I couldn't keep track of anything, and I started using a discussion forum, and I put it up there, and I realized that not only did it help me organize my stuff, but my students were doing different things. And some of those things were really positive, some of them weren't. But it's I got engaged that way, so I started from the teaching side, and then slowly started helping the person next to me, and then that person had me help somebody else, and then I kind of slid my way over, right? So I've been doing live interactive webcasts with educators from around the world for about 7 years. We've done, let's say, 350 live webcasts, about an hour long, with people from all over. So what I've done most, I guess, in the last 10 years or so is talk to people about this and find out about their experiences and see how things have gone. We've tried stuff out that hasn't worked at all, and we've tried some stuff out that's been pretty exciting. And I'll talk a little bit about some of that, too. My other life, I'm actually the manager of web communications and innovations at the university. So I actually work in the communications department. And I'm the chair of the e-learning committee on campus. And I'm also one of the people who gets involved in most of the sort of innovation-based technology questions on campus. Not the decision maker, but rather, let's bring that guy into the room and see what he has to say about it. So I have my feet in a lot of different parts of the campus. I'm an educator. I see myself as an educator. I do teach classes. But I spend more time in the administration side of technology nowadays than I do actually in the classroom, although I have a class that starts in 5 days, which I'm still kind of working on. So the first thing I want to say about this kind of talk, and I feel this way about the technology too, is that content's easy. You can get out there. I could have recorded this at home, and you guys could have sat in front of your computers and watched it. But I think there's a real difference in actually being here. So I'm not one of these sort of technology people who says we put everything online and leave it there and there's no difference. I actually think that being in a place, being in an event is important. And to acknowledge that, I'm hoping to do a fair amount of interactive conversation about some of the topics we're going to talk about. So I'm going to throw some questions out to the crowd and try to get a sense of where you guys are and try to get a feeling for what you guys are doing. Because one of the things that I'm hoping to get out of this is a better understanding of what makes you guys tick here too. So just to get us started, I want to talk about 3 trends that are kind of out there where higher ed is overlapping with technology in a huge way. The first one is flexibility. So everywhere I go, people are talking about how can we make this so that the student gets more decision making, how can we make it so it's easier for them, so it's more convenient for them. And one of the ones that blows me away is just-in-time enrollment. Do you guys do any of that here? Do you know what I mean by just-in-time enrollment? No? Kidding. So there's a school that I talked to a couple of weeks ago that what they're doing is a college. What they're doing is student walks in the door, student wants to start a class that day, student gets enrolled that day, and starts that day. Just work your brain through that. I walk in the door, and I start. How is that possible? How could I possibly start that day? Well, it's where the technology comes in. In that institution, every program needs to have 2 courses that can take rolling enrollment. That can have 37 people in it, each at a different part of the course, and there's somebody whose job it is to keep track of where they are and make sure that they keep going forward. And then ostensibly 16 weeks after, or 10 weeks after, or 12 weeks after you start, you finish that course, and then you make it into some kind of cohort, and then you start in the normal system. And this is one of those sort of extreme flexibility issues that the technology is starting to do. So it's only because the educational technology is there that we can do this, but yet it becomes something that really pushes the way the administration sort of makes decisions, the way planning happens, and it influences the way your departments are structured, because then you need to have somebody who is constantly watching that, right, and is ready to intake someone on any given day. During the week, actually. They didn't allow enrollment on the weekend. So one of the other things in terms of flexibility that we're seeing, and this has been going on for 5 or 6 years now, is the separation of credentialing from the actual learning process. So if you look at what Western Governors University does in the States, you can go and challenge for any course today. Ostensibly, you learned about that somewhere, and who knows where you learned it, it doesn't matter. You can challenge for the course and get the credit right off the bat. Again, it's that kind of flexibility that allows you, and you can do it online. Like you can go and challenge for the course and get the credit, and it's actually at a accredited university, and it can interlap with a lot of things in a lot of different places. So there's my 2 examples. Now, let's see if we can get an example from the crowd. Can you guys give me an example of one of the places of flexibility that you guys are being challenged with now that somehow overlaps in this way? Crowd goes all silent. Okay, we're going over here.
This actually is not an example, so I apologize for that. But just to follow, I had a question on your separation of learning from credentialing. In this instance you mentioned, where the student goes in and they course challenge, do they pay the same fees as a student who would
a little bit less, I think.
Course? My guess is they do.
It's a little bit less.
A little bit less.
Yeah, that's what. But that's all that university does. Well, not all they do, but that's their main focus.
So the institution still gets essentially the same amount of money they would, almost the same amount of money they would if the student actually took the course. So it's not a bad deal for them financially.
Oh, it's a fantastic deal for them financially. Yeah, it works out great because they don't have to worry about all that messy teaching stuff, which is hard, let's face it. Not to mention buildings and seats and all those things.
Thank you. I'll think about the other example, but thank you for that.
Yeah. Somebody else, another brave soul who can talk to me about flexibility here. Oh, it's such a quiet crowd. There we go. Yay! Wow, look at that. Can we have the next person be like way in the other side of the room so we can just watch Valerie run back and forth? That'd be awesome.
So I'll just say that I don't know if this is what you're looking for.
You go ahead.
We're developing programs now that are entirely online. We've been doing this for many, many years, but now last year started a graduate program, undergraduate program will be starting this year. Everything is online. The entire program is online. Students will just come to campus for strategic on-site engagements of somewhere between 3 days and 2 weeks at different times during the course of the program. So this is in an effort to try to maximize our enrollment pool so that we're actually enrolling from wherever people want to come into the program.
And then essentially fly in from wherever and have that kind. So regional, but not necessarily local. Because the flying in is probably not going to work as well from China, say.
Probably not international. No,
Right.
but I think we have already got some people who are coming in from the U.S. So we do have some international students.
I thought you had a question. Do we have one more? Oh, there you go. He's had a chance to think. Perfect.
Price is right.
It's great. You're doing a great job. This is actually what they asked me here for, is to get you run around.
An example comes from a course I'm involved in here, which is a first-year psychology course. And in that course, it's a long time ago, split the course into 2 parts, Psycho 100A, Psycho 100B. And of course, the idea was you take Psycho 100A because, of course, you logically have to have Psycho 100A before you take Psycho 100B, of course, because we've always done it that way. And of course, we looked at it and thought, well, why? I mean, these are introductory courses, both of them. And why are we asking for this? And so what we ended up doing was saying, well, really, they could take Psycho 100B just fine. And many students, I think we get 200 or 300 students who now take Psycho 100B by itself. Many of them do get A's in the course. We advise they take Psycho 100A first, because there's a few things in there that's useful, but there's no reason. So it's a flexible arrangement that I think has allowed us to accommodate students who want to take one particular aspect of the curriculum and not the other. Can't do that with all courses, but I think thinking about prerequisites and why you really have them there, and if you need to have them there all the time, is one example of flexibility.
Well, and then the trick about this is that institutionally for the IT shop, that creates the whole challenge of, well, if this is a credit and this goes with this one, how does that work with the degree audit, and how does that work with everything else? So the flexibility is great to offer, but then that puts the weight somewhere else on somebody to figure out how that's going to work out. Do you have one you want to?
Also wanted to mention that we have the TiTalk hashtag, and some people there want to ask questions as well. So for those of you who are actually on TiTalk, on the hashtag, if you can actually include, or Jillian C. will be monitoring that and raising questions. Is there any questions that you spotted there?
Not yet.
They just asked if they could.
Can we ask questions?
Yes, you can.
No questions.
No.
So one of those other questions, and this time I don't have examples, so I'm hoping to get a little bit more from you guys this time, is internationalization, right? So one of those things that happens, and this is not only about international recruitment, which of course the internet makes an awful lot easier, it's also about what happens on campus whenever you internationalize a campus. And that's one of those challenges that's happening across the country, well, this country, across the states right now. As we look further and further out to international possibilities, we end up with people with, language challenges, yes, but also cultural issues. We end up with different sort of groups forming inside of a classroom. But there's all these other things that come along with internationalization that are challenging, and they're issues that you need to deal with. So international issues. I mean, you guys, as far as I understand, are doing the same kinds of things that we are at UPEI. You're looking out and looking to bring in recruitment in that sense. How much does that touch your daily lives right now? In the back? Thank you for being so far back. Valerie, you.
You just want me to comment?
Yeah, please go ahead.
I just got back actually from 10 days in Brazil to the Conference of the Americas on International Education. And the challenges continue to be localizing or trying to make people, faculty, more than students, more aware, faculty and administration, more aware of the need to internationalize at home more than just doing the recruitment and expanding. You can have websites on different languages, but if there are no programs that are offered or courses in different languages, then how international is that? So there were many different ideas discussed on what internationalization means beyond just expanding your curriculum, and admissions processes, the transferring credits, validation, standardization versus non-standardization, and so forth. So I think that the contribution that UVic is making, or we had, the participation in this particular conference was strong in terms of the processes that are ongoing here, and what are some of the challenges as well.
And I mean, that's the localized internationalization is really great, and you have the best one in the world, but if you have online students who never come here, you end up with a whole other host of challenges and no support systems necessarily designed to support them. I mean, a lot of institutions do, but it adds to the challenge, right? As we grow, as we expand, as we get more flexible, as we diversify, as we get more international, the challenges just kind of stack and pile, right? So how many people are familiar with this term? Analytics in higher ed. Has anybody sort of started down that road yet? A little bit, talked about it, heard about it maybe? There's someone pointing at something? Yeah. So I was just at the Learning Analytics and Knowledge Conference in Vancouver. I just came over this morning. I was there last night. And some of the stuff that they're talking about is kind of breathtaking in the way that it changes the way you can talk about education. So the people at the university, I think it's University of America, I always forget. But his name is Phil Ice, he's the VPA there. And he was talking about the dashboard that they have that they claim will tell you who is the most likely to drop out of your school in the next 5 days. They have an algorithm that goes across the entire, Before people are like, what is he talking about? So it goes across the whole system and it says, well, there's a student who's going to class and oh, their grades are starting to fall off. And we know that if somebody's grades fall off and they drop out of a student society, then they're 25% more likely to drop out of school, right? Now, that's good, I guess, if what we're trying to do is support students. And there's a really good example of a project like that. At Purdue, they have something called the Signals Project. And the Signals Project is, it has signals, the green and yellow and red, and it shows up on every student's course. And they have an instance of every course on their LMS. Whether or not you're using it or not, there's some kind of interface there for the students. And they also can see it from inside of their login to the campus. So on that, it has a red, a yellow, and a green for the courses that they're in. If you're green, then you're sort of keeping up with everybody else and you're doing OK. If you're yellow, you're at risk. If you're red, there needs to be an intervention. Those interventions are student services being called. Maybe you've been invited out to the Math Help Center. You're directed to people who are able to help you out with those kinds of things. So originally, and I talked to John about this yesterday, John Campbell about this yesterday. Originally, they had numbers. So it would say, you would turn it on, you would look at it and would say, you have a 37% chance of passing this course, which frightened people to death. Oh no, yeah. And then they said, well, that's a bit intimidating, and realistically, the algorithms are not that accurate. So, maybe it's 38. But what they did is they went to the signal process. So if you're within a certain range, you get this warning that you're going to probably need some help if you're going to be able to get through this. They had over 1,000 students enrolled in this in 2007. They did their tests before that. In 2007, they enrolled, I don't know what it is, I think it's 1,200 people. And they got their results for 2011. So the people who had been in the school for 4 years had done a 4-year degree. The average completion rate for a 4-year degree in Purdue had been, for 15 years, somewhere around 69%. Still pretty good. 4-year completion rate, 4-year degree. The people who had done one course with the Signals project in it, the completion rate switched to 87%. They did 18 points better in terms of completion. So that means that of that 1,000 people, I set myself up for math, a lot more finished the class, right? And they measured that, and then first results, they looked at them, and John was telling us yesterday. He looked at it and like, that can't be true. So they checked it again, they got the same number. That can't be true. And they said, oh, it must be an SAT. It must be that those better kids were going into this course. So they controlled for their SAT scores that were lower. They tried every sort of measurement they could find, and it turns out that if you give a student a little bit of feedback that tells them they're struggling at the point that they're struggling and how they can go about solving that, it's way, way easier to go to school. It's not a complicated idea. We have evidence for forever. One of the very few things that most of us agree on as educators is that if you give good feedback, students do better. Most people are going to agree with that. And this system is designed to do that. So it's pretty cool.
For
You want some?
academic signals, or are they? So just a question, I don't know if you know the answer to this or not, but at Purdue, are they looking strictly at academics and assessments for these signals, or are they looking at other things that might predict whether they're going to be successful or not?
You're foreshadowing what I was just about to say. That's a great question. Thank you, Clint. That's a wonderful question. At Purdue, they're doing academic, they're doing demographic, it's across the board. It's across all the verticals, as people are fond of saying. So it's across the whole campus. But that is the best implementation that I know of analytics being used. There's a lot of other places where it's only what they call academic analytics, which is how do we keep the student here, not what we would call learner analytics, which is about making the student a better learner or helping them with their learning. So these guys are going all the way across, and they're really focused on student success in a fuzzy way, but it's not necessarily the way it's going everywhere. Go ahead. Valerie's not paying attention. Sorry, Valerie.
It sounds like a great system. We're trying to do some things in terms of what we call early warning, which
Yeah,
is very much like
that's right.
some of our classes. Is this a proprietary system? Does it talk well to other learning platforms? Does it cost money? Do you know any of those sorts of issues in terms of signals?
Well, there's not only signals out there. You guys your SIS system is, what's the name of the company now? I can never remember. That thing. They have a system on the way. They have one already built in that they're developing right now. Everybody, like at this summit meeting I was at yesterday, Gates Foundation was there. Those guys, tell me again. Banner's good enough. They're all there right at the point of trying to figure out how to incorporate this into the stuff that they're doing. So it's coming everywhere. The question is how is it going to be implemented, you know? So, yeah, go ahead.
We just have a question for the TITALK tag. Are the signals almost like reverse clickers? Is that what makes sense? Is the signals?
Is the signals project almost?
Oh,
like
project.
reverse-
Sorry. Is the signals project almost like reverse clickers? There you go.
Almost like reverse clickers. Okay. I mean, I guess in a sense, if you imagine the clicker to be like a spaceship and it pointing back with a giant computer.
Actually, I should give some backstory. This guy's from PEI.
He's one of mine. I should have guessed, actually. Nice. See, this is what happens when you let people use the internet. Yeah, this is the problem right here. Yeah, I'm not a big fan of clickers, which is why that came up. So most of the technology that we end up using comes down to storing and getting that stuff out. So essentially, we have a database, we put stuff in a database, we take stuff out of a database. And when you kind of break down all the stuff we use on the internet, vast majority of it ends up in this category. I mean, we've been doing storing for a long time. We started out with brains, sitting around the fire, telling stories, and the things that we needed to have, the things we needed to be able to do was remember. Remembering was absolutely critical, because if, Jimmy Stoneman died and nobody knew how to make the nice sharp axe thing, you're in trouble, right? Because there's no other place to put it. So we use our brains, and we see the Bardic stuff from 25, 26, 2700 years ago, where people had all these games and processes and learning ways where you were training your brain to remember stuff, because no matter where you were, if you couldn't remember it, it was gone, right? And then we have these nasty things here. I said it, it always does it quiet in the crowd. With the books, we got a chance to put it down. We can write, we can put it down, we can put it together. There's some problems with that. You've got to decide ahead of time. Anybody who's ever published a book knows that it takes almost 2 years for it to come out. You have to make a bunch of decisions. By the time it gets published, you're like, do I really want to say that? And it's too late. You can't change it. It goes in and it's done. And Socrates used to say the problem with books is they can't defend themselves. Everything that's in there stays static. And there's advantages to that. It's certainly better than forgetting stuff. But it's a technology that has stuff imposed on it. Now, we've moved to the next phase, right? This is Oscar, and that's Posey, and they're my kids, and this is my son's first written blog post. So this is on his blog, which he's had for a couple of years, but this is his first written blog post. And 2 weeks after he posted this, there were 2 computers on in my house. And he went, how is that on both computers at the same time? And I went, well, it's on the internet. And he goes, but if I'm using it over here, how is it over there? And it took a little bit of talking, and we worked our way through it. And he kind of got what a database does. And that's that where that book is one thing, and only I can have it at one time, and then we can kind of share it maybe. And maybe 3 or 4 of us, maybe I can read to you. But it's still limited in the ways that it goes out. It doesn't really scale very well, right? But this thing scales as well as I manage the server it's on, which is only so good. But it does scale, right? And it allows for a lot of other things to happen. It allows for it to spread around geographically. It allows for it to spread around to different people. And in a lot of cases, it allows people to go in and edit it. Not so much here, but it does allow for people to comment on it. So people go in and reply back to it. All things that our brains and books, well, particularly books, didn't do so well. So we've moved to this database, right? And a lot of the stuff we end up thinking about the internet is about taking what is essentially a book and finding some way to digitize it and then finding some way to throw it online. And when we go through the tools, let's just see if we can't just sort of shout out, sorry. Just sort of shout out the tools that you use that are essentially store and access. Things you throw up online, like Moodle, it's store and access. Put stuff up, other people go look at stuff. What else have we got? YouTube, great. Dropbox. Twitter is a great example. We think of it as real time, but it's not. You just put it in a database, somebody else looks at it. That's all it is. Blogs. Anybody else? That one's catchy. That one's more real time. In a sense, it goes in a database and it comes out real fast. And it does hold it. So yes, in a sense, Facebook, yep. I'm not sure about Illuminate. He's doing the same thing. What's that? Illuminate. So all of these technologies essentially work the same way. We have a place where we put stuff, and then lots of other people can see it. So it essentially works like Oscar's blog, right? You can put stuff there, other people can look at it, and the flexibility, analytics, internationalization, all this stuff is facilitated. You know, we look at the flexibility for the students I talked about earlier about the rolling enrollment. We look at internationalization, our ability to reach out to those people, have a blog, have a website that reaches out to them, create videos that are our faculty doing their research and posting them online and having people all over the world see them. Those are all things that are take a thing, put it up, let other people look at it. And the question becomes, I understand how a face-to-face classroom works, and I understand how that works locally. But when it comes to putting stuff online and having other people look at it, the question is can we compete that way? Is that something we're going to be able to win at? You know, as higher education, if all of a sudden what we're doing is taking stuff, putting it online, having other people look at it, and deciding whether or not they got the answers right, are we going to be able to compete there? Well, you guys, everybody know the Khan Academy? Yes? No? I'm going to explain it anyway. I got a couple of no's in the crowd. This is started by essentially one guy who was doing a series of videos that explain some of the basic ideas of how to do math, science, mostly math and science, but a lot of other stuff too. This is about Euclid, and they're usually 5, 6, 7-minute videos, and you can go in, and there's a little system inside that allows you to keep track of what you learned, and did you get the test right, and so there's a lot of movement, particularly in the United States, but in a lot of other places, to wrap these into, say, calculus classes. So I'm a student, I'm not good at calculus, but I'm gonna, kind of go in here and fuss around and kind of figure out those basic concepts. So when I go back to the classroom, I'll understand them better. So this is, there's a cajillion people who look at this now. It's been extraordinarily successful. And it's got the sort of brand power now that all the big guys are putting money into it. And most of us are not going to compete here. But then again, these guys aren't really what higher ed's about, right? This isn't really what we do here. And when it comes to just storing, nobody's really any better than these guys. Archive.org, what's the number? 647,877 movies they have stored in there. You know, everybody know the Wayback Machine? It's crazy. If you can go and put in a website and go back to what that website looked in 2001, it's amazing. I mean, not even to talk about things like Wikipedia and all those other systems out there that really do an extraordinarily good job of storing specific kinds of content so that other people can go and look at it and take it out. And if you compare that, like I said earlier when I was talking about Western Governors University, if I can go and find the content like this, and then I can go to Western Governors University and get credit for it, you got something going on there. But who knows what Western Governors University, how many people knew the name before I said it? Yeah, a couple of people, and actually they're the same people who nodded at the technical questions earlier. And there's 5 or 6 people who knew it. So who knows who those people are, and I don't think they're a giant threat to my institution or to yours. And does everybody know what a black swan is? This is the one that the next slide that you're going to taunt me for. Does everybody know the concept of a black swan? It's a giant event that nobody really predicted that has the potential to completely change how something works. So one of the black swans that people use all the time is that what happens to all of us if oil costs $500 a barrel? Well, it changes a university because people aren't going to be able to afford to drive to it. It changes all these things. It's one sort of event that trickle changes all the things around it. And I was playing around with some friends over the holidays, and we came up with one of the ones that we thought was kind of crazy, but what might be interesting. And we posted this after that discussion. And we said, what happens if MIT starts doing open courses? And they say, we're going to have courses on the internet, and we're going to have 1 million people take them, and we'll hire 10,000 tutors, and we'll teach first-year physics to everybody. And then the next day, MITx was launched. And then now, we have edX. How many people knew the name Harvard before I said it today? A different story entirely, right? These guys, everybody knows them. They have the brand strength to do whatever they want, and they're not going into the internet place to make their brand stronger, right? They don't need it. So why are they there? And what can they do that's a risk? And this is something that's a risk to the stuff that we do. Well, if they put content online, people are going to care. They're going to think that it's authoritative. And if they find a way to accredit it, all of a sudden that means the first-year students, when you have a class of 400 physics students who take first-year physics, why wouldn't they take it here? Why wouldn't you have MIT or Harvard on your transcript? And at economies of scale, if they're teaching, well, I'll give you an example. I was in India 6 weeks ago, and when I got on the ground, the first question we were asked in the meeting was, so we have 500 million new students we need to train in the next 9 years. How do we do that? Well, this is one of the ways to do it, particularly if they can get the accrediting worked out and they can get the data worked out, because that's the other thing. They're going to be able to map millions of students and do that analytics stuff I was talking about earlier. So this is really kind of the top end of where the technology can get us. This is the impact stuff, right? So if we're about content and we are about post content, look at content, put it up there and access it, then this is our competition going forward. These are the guys we're competing against. I don't like it. But, this was launched 2 days ago. My presentation's a little choppy because I was like, oh, got to put that in the middle. So I missed the slide in there. Because this has got me all, because really, they could teach 500 million people. Why not? It's just a database. How many people are on Facebook? 850 million. Where did Facebook start? Harvard. This could very well be the Facebook of first-year education. So, that's happy. But storing and accessing is not the only thing that technology can offer. And that's really, 25 minutes, that's really what I want to talk about. And that's what most of my work is in, is what's that next level past that? The guys from Harvard, or at least the New York Times, is calling what they're doing a MOOC, a massive open online course. I was around for some of those. I was around for the first one that was called that, and I've done 4 or 5 of them since. And fundamentally, those courses are about people creating networks, about learning from others, about learning the literacies they need to live and work with a chip in your head that has all the information in the world, which is essentially where we're at. I have something in my pocket, wherever I left it, a telephone somewhere, that has access to pretty much everything I want. That changes what we're doing, right? And if we take that as a start, and we take the internet's existence as a start, what are the possibilities, and how do we talk about ourselves as different from 500 million people in Harvard's course? What is the thing that we can do that differentiates us from that? So before we start talking about what that innovation is and how it works, I have these 2 quotes, and neither of them are people that I necessarily always like to associate myself with, but they're on target, I think, in some sense. You know, if I'd asked people about the car, they would have said they wanted faster horses, because innovation's not about asking people what they need, it's about taking the responsibility as an organization for thinking about what you think they need, and that's how you differentiate yourself. And Apple is famous for never doing market research, because those people in the marketplace didn't know what this was. You know, they had no idea what this thing was going to do. How could they? They weren't the innovators.
Just ask one question from TiTalk.
Yep. Better not be from PEI.
Actually, I'm not sure where this gentleman's from. His name's Lyndon Forrest, and he's curious to know what you think about iTunes U.
It's hosting. It's the same stuff, right? You take it, you put it up there, you take it down. And there's lots of that out there. And again, take the credentializing universities. Maybe, you know, you said it's a good model. Maybe you guys end up doing the same thing. We'll find a great way to PLAR quicker, because PLAR, anybody who's done it, can be a terribly long, painful process. But if you end up with a process that's, not that it's a bad process, if there's any PLARs here, but if you can find a way to do it, there's a market there, because they can find a lot of the stuff they need, particularly for early courses, inside of iTunes U. So asking those questions, what do the students need? Not what do they want, because I don't necessarily buy that question. I don't know, maybe that's argumentative in some places. But I'm not, in the question, what do they need, is an understanding of who they are as people. All those things that as people, I mean, how many hundreds of years of educational experience do we have in this room? I presume that amongst the bunch of us, we can work out what those students are needing from the education, at least in the kind of education that we're looking to give. Because again, if we're not Harvard and we're not edX, we have to decide what we are, and we have to decide what the university is about and what that value is that we're offering. So what's that thing that we give that's different than just content and access? And you know, what it comes down to is, why do we teach? And that's the question that I ask all the time. Because when I ask crowds and I say, look, if you're going to hire 2 people, you're going to hire one person and you have 2 people, and you can know one of them has the content that you need and the other one works hard, which one are you going to pick? Does anybody want the content person? Anybody? No. I've yet to have anybody say they want the content person. This is the 6th time I've asked that question. So it's not about preparing people with content, right? And yet, so much of our educational system, and particularly so much of our educational technology, is about getting the content up and letting people see it. So this is from very good educators, and it's not particularly new. And the differentiation, this is what they're talking about their students need, right? This is the decision that they've made. They need to cope with complexity. They need to not just change, but changeability, improvability, and responsiveness. They need to be able to morph through their whole careers. Not necessarily true 50 years ago. Maybe true. Maybe we just didn't see it that way, but certainly not the speed that they need to now, right? So these guys are looking to see how they can teach for changeability, improvability, and responsiveness. So this is the system that I use to work this out. When I'm planning a course right now, there's a smirk from Leslie. When I plan a course, I try to figure out how I'm dealing with these 4 things, right? So the simple best practice stuff, it's in every field. What are the words I need to know? What are the sort of, and I was watching the guys take off. I took a boat plane here today, and it was so great. But anyway, I took a boat plane over, and they have a checklist. And that checklist is, put out the flaps and do the next thing and turn the thing. And those are the best practices for flying that plane, and you need them, right? Those are the simple things. There's the complicated stuff where, there may be 1 or 2 ways. How am I going to back up this plane when I get it out there? Well, I can go that way or I can go that way. But there are right answers. And then halfway through the flight, the rainstorm came in. Now, there's no best practice for dealing with a rainstorm. He's got a sense. He looks at it. He kind of figures out which way it's going to go. And he adapts to it. And he looks at that uncertainty. He makes his way around it. And he does something about it. That 4th box, kind of a scary box. It's the chaotic one. It's when you just need to make a decision. It doesn't even need to be a good one. You just need to start. And that's something else that people are challenged with. And I don't even mean, I'm not trying to say that I think higher ed is about getting people prepared for work. What I'm saying is that all of life works out this way. My child wants a cupcake. Well, should they have it? Well, it'd make them happy, but it's not really good for them. And they already had a cupcake today. And as you go through, all of our challenges are like that. We have to make decisions. And what I'm hoping to do is whatever thing I'm teaching, in this case, the course that's coming up, educational technology, I want them prepared for the uncertainty. So there are best practices. Definitely don't do this. Definitely do this. Be secure with your students' information. Non-negotiable. Those best practices. And as you walk around, how do I prepare people for the rest of those things? So we talked a little bit about the rhizomes, and I got 15 minutes left, and I got asked to put time at the end, so I'll try to hurry through. This is how I see learning. Messy, tangled, and yet somehow connected, right? So I'm looking for my students to pull this together. It's not a neat process. It's not a tidy process. I want them to be able to start a process in the middle. We were talking earlier about the switch to Moodle 2 and talking about the step-by-step processes that were there. The problem with a step-by-step process is you can only start at 1 and move your way down, right? If you can teach someone or be involved in them learning how to understand a process, they can start at any point and move to another point. That's not just about technology, it's about everything. So if you give somebody one path, then they can't adapt, right? They can't grow, they can't it doesn't lead to that lifelong learning that we're so interested in. So when we look at the way this is actually working out there, one of the things that becomes critical is the idea of multiple voices. And I know that's a little small, but this is from, does anybody know who Alec Kouros is? University of Regina. He teaches an excellent graduate course. I don't think he's going to be teaching it next year. It's too bad. He's going on a sabbatical. It's an excellent graduate course. We also call it the lazy professor approach, where he calls all of his friends and he said, "You wouldn't teach week for me, would you?" And then we go in, and I did October 25th. It was a long, rhizomatic discussion, that one was. But we went in to, I guess it's collaborate, illuminate, and then I presented for an hour, and he built his week around that presentation. So he used the paper that I wrote, gave it to his students, and then brought the actual person who wrote the paper in to talk to his students about it. So that instead of his students being prepared with his point of view or just his interpretation, it broadens out, right? You get those multiple voices. And that's one of the things that technology can do that's really kind of amazing. So a couple of years ago, I was teaching my students about how we were talking about marketing and how videos are working and stuff, and it was at the time that the Old Spice commercials were on. Do you remember those? Well, the day that they had a really crazy day, where what they did was on Twitter, you could send in a quote, and if they liked it, they would make a commercial. They made, I think it's 140 commercials that day. It was unbelievable. And they posted them one after another. my students were in class when that was happening, so we happened to see it. And then I tweeted out, wow, that was a really great experience for my students. The guy who designed the campaign got wind of it through a friend of mine and came in by Skype the next morning to talk about it. And we got a chance to sort of take what my really vaguely correct interpretations of what they were doing and actually get way closer to the source. And it was a really, really great, and those are the things that are possible. No, they don't happen every day, because I have that one example. But this kind of thing is really possible, because we do all have those colleagues. Now, the lazy professor thing's a bit of a misnomer, because now he's beholden to me, and he's beholden to Sharesky, and he's beholden to all these other people, because he's got to go and do it for us now. But it does provide that multiple voice, and that's one of the things that technology can really, really do. The connection for the students is also, my course, the one that I'm teaching, ED 366, this is from the 2010 version of it. There was a contest from a colleague of ours, actually, on Levine, send in your openness experience thing. And I got my students to do it. And they did a video, and they posted some stuff, and they wrote an experience document, and they sent it in. And they got part of this network of other students who were working on the same kinds of things. They got a chance to see what other students who had different, maybe better, faculty were doing. And they got a chance to really get out there and network and connect with other people who were doing the same kind of thing that they were doing. That's another one of those things that are possible. Do you have a question? You're holding the microphone like you're...
I just like...
I know, I just go blah, 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 blah.
So a question from Kim on the TiTalk hashtag. Is edX different fundamentally from Coursera, MOOCs, brackets, Penn, Princeton, etc.?
Is it fundamentally different? Not than the Princeton one. Not necessarily. The keystone to it is who's behind it, right? Because China knows who Harvard and MIT is, and India knows who Harvard and MIT is, and they're out front of the process. And they're actually bringing their faculty into the process. They're going to have some of the best people in the field contributing to the content of that. And there's nobody else who can really compare to that. And that, to me, is the distinction. It's the weight of the brand that just blows my mind. So we can actually have courses that are networked. So the MOOCs, massive open online course. How many people know the term? How many people think it sounds really silly? It's my fault. Yeah, sorry about that. It was a long day. But what we do in those courses is we don't necessarily nail down the curriculum. And actually, in my ED 366 course, we start without a curriculum. And because all the content is out there. And my students are responsible for going to find it and building their own textbook as the course goes on. Because it's there. It's all there. And when the course is over and they need to know how to do something, they're going to have to go out and find it and pull it together and figure it out. So why not model those literacies during the course? So that's kind of how those are built. And this is the step-by-step sort of process that we suggest to people in the bigger open courses, because they don't have faculty or support staff helping them out. We have 2,500 people, the one we have now, and certainly not active at this point. But those people don't have direct people helping them. They have to find other friends, other people taking the course. And we say, orient yourself to the environment, tell people who you are, sort of share the stuff that you do, network with people, cluster, find people to work with, and then focus on a project. This is a way of learning and pulling stuff together that the technology really facilitates, because out there, you can find other people like you. You can run on a hashtag and find and make those kinds of connections, which, you know, my partner is doing her PhD at the University of Prince Edward Island, and she's the only person doing the stuff that she's doing there. So 15 years ago, she would have had to have gone to a conference to get somebody else who was doing the same thing. 4 months after she started, she found somebody who's doing the same thing, ended up at a conference, met somebody from Inside Higher Ed, and is now posting blogs writing for Inside Higher Ed on the stuff that she's doing. Because those connections are possible, right? The people don't all need to be in front of you. And this is also possible in the positive sense. So we can have, go ahead. Hold on, she wants to get you on the recording there. 7 minutes.
It's a question about MOOCs.
I have some numbers in my brain. He's been following the Tigger trails lately about what's happening in Stanford and Harvard. In your experience, what number of participants actually complete the course versus those registered?
In a MOOC?
Yeah.
Low percentage.
Very low, isn't it?
Yeah, but completion is one of those things that we don't necessarily think about in the same way. I'll give you an example. Faculty member at my university who comes to me and says, I hated your course. I said, thanks. And I said, it was free. And he said, well, design is terrible. Nobody's ever going to finish. I said, well, one, it's not really about finishing. Well, tell me about your experience. And he said, well, I made it the first 4 or 5 weeks, and then the topic kind of got boring. I met this guy, and then we started talking about something, and we wrote a paper, and we just went to a conference and presented it. I'm like, sounds pretty good, but I didn't finish. And I said, I don't care. Because we're not in some kind of social contract where I'm trying to get you to complete. Essentially, we're taking something that we care about and talking about it, in this case in the MOOC, too long, but talking about it over time. And some discussions start, some people drop out, some people come back, and then I go to a conference and I meet 15 people whose name I've never seen before who said, I read everything, but I never participated.
I agree with you.
Yeah.
I'm just curious about when we start thinking about accrediting these courses,
Different story,
what
yeah.
happens at Stanford and at Harvard around this, and also what happens when people branch off and start building corporations or things, which is maybe the way it's going to go.
I think if people are paying and they're getting credit, you're going to see an awful lot more people finishing. And that's what we're accustomed to, right? One of the things that we were looking to do with the MOOC was explore what happens whenever you took all those things off. And what happens is a lot of people sort of fade off and say, well, I just couldn't fit it into my schedule. I think partially that's because we're not the world's best facilitators. Because, again, we're doing it off the side of our desk and not really in a focused kind of way. I think part of it's because people aren't accustomed to doing that. Responsibility is something that's difficult to put in, and I'm getting close to overtime. I'm going to skip that and that. These are really interesting slides, too. Do you know what this is? This is an analytics. This is an export from Facebook. This is my life on Facebook. The thing over there is my hometown. Those are other people that I've been connected to. The orange thing in the middle was when I went to Korea. That's the University of Prince Edward Island. Those are the educational people that I work with. That big old pink dot there is my PhD student I was just talking about. I love calling her my PhD student. My partner is the big old pink dot there in the middle. I hope you're listening. But this is what you can find out through the analytics process, right? Where are the connections? Who's connecting with who? Most importantly for me, you can find out who's not connecting. So these are the 8 people in my Facebook community that don't know anybody else in my community. You see this happen in your classroom, these people are struggling. They're not connected. They're not brought in. They're not pulled together. That's the upside of learning analytics. You can run something called Snap in Moodle without embedding it. You can put it in now. Don't tell the IT guys I said that. Have you guys tried it? It's really cool. It's actually from you.
At a conference 2 days ago, an expert said clustering is not, in fact, a direct correlation with learning.
Not clustering, but outliers.
Yeah,
if you've got
that person's outlier is not in itself a fact that that person's not learning. It may be indicative of that. I'm just saying it's a strong assertion to say these people are in trouble. And that this is the problem with this analytics approach, right? Is that based on an algorithm, you then have a definitive outcome when it's not definitive.
You're exactly right.
So,
I was speaking too quickly. He is correct. Likely, those people are struggling, and there is an imaginable world in which they're just happy working by themselves. Likely. So, what I'm trying to say is we have 2 options going forward with this stuff. Thanks. I knew you couldn't do it. I knew you couldn't. No, but it's totally fair. You're totally right about that. Go ahead.
I teach these very large classes, and I'm very concerned with outliers, and so I really want to hear a little bit more about this. this. So you can do this in your Facebook page. Any ideas of how we can, using analytics or any other methodology, locate some of the outliers? Because these are some of the ones who clearly do most of the time, are more
Like-
a variety of different things. But not only on academic grounds. I'm constantly telling my students, network with the university,
That's right.
connect with it.
That's right.
That this fits in the whole idea of learning community and so
Yes,
on.
it does.
So this is great on Facebook. And so using Moodle or other elements.
There's a
is how
tool
can
built
we-
at UBC, actually, that integrates really, really nicely in the Moodle.
That's a question we have on TiTalk. What tool did you use to visualize the data?
That there, Gephi. Gephi is a bit intimidating. I don't really understand it. But there is an export tool from Facebook that you can export the data, and then in Gephi, it's this sort of dynamic colory engine, GEPHI, and it's really, really interesting. It does some amazing stuff. If you are interested, go check out Tony Hirst online, Hirst. He is the great guru of that, and we'll talk to you about really great things. So realistically, what I'm talking about is the difference between two things. We can be this, where we give lots and lots of content stuff, and then this is from XKCD, where all of that learning happens outside the classroom and we're not supporting it. Or we can be the kind of group that supports clustering and tries to pull people together and are helping people network and see sort of, and pull themselves into this net space, into this other space. And most importantly, we need to make sure that we know who we are and that we make the technology that, not the other way around. And if we're not careful and we're not paying attention, then things like analytics, things like, we're forcing into international and all the rest of this stuff, we're going to get forced by the technology into being something that won't work for us and something that probably won't help us. Thanks.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. That was a very stimulating conversation, and I appreciate you coming. We are going to be hosting more Thai Talks, so we'll be using the hashtag. And if there are any other comments or questions, you feel free to tweet it to hashtag or email it.
If you have any questions for me, feel free to tweet at me or find my email somehow and send me an email. Perfect.
And can we get your slide share available too? We can maybe.
And once it stops being broken,
Okay.
I'll post it.
All right, so we're going to find a way to also share the slides. And so if you want to check out the tag or thai.uvic.ca. Are there any, do you want to take any other questions?
Do you have people with you guys? Sure. I took off the mic though. Should I put the mic back on? You still hear it? Can you still hear it, guys?
Thanks for the talk, it was great. I guess sort of a big general philosophical question. It sounds like you're talking about sort of thinking about education, moving away from sort of knowledge-based, knowledge delivery, and more about creativity. How do you collaborate? How do you use that knowledge? How do you create innovation? I just finished reading Jonah Lehrer's new book, Imagine, How Creativity Works, which I think every teacher and every student should read. One of the most important things he sort of comments on is kind of the scalability of creativity, how when cities get bigger, they become more creative. When organizations get bigger, they get less creative. And it's all about the question of rhizomes. They become more process-oriented, more hierarchical. You have less of these kind of random connections and opportunities for learning. How do you deal with that when, I mean, I'd like to think of the campus more like a city than elsewhere, but it's not. How do you deal with the silos of contemporary post-secondary education and creative culture?
If I come up with an answer for this, I'm going to make myself a lot of money. I mean, it's tough. We were talking about this morning. One of the things that's happened is that a lot of our models, they're not 100 years old. They're actually about 10 years old. So 10 years ago, when I made my first website, the one that I talked about with the discussion forums and that stuff, I had to sort of figure out what I was going to do and then hand code the thing, technologically, and sort of kind of stuff it over here and do all the stuff, which required two completely different skill sets, both of which I was at. So what we ended up with inside of our institution is a technology department that you would bring stuff to finished, and they would turn it into a technology, right? Whereas now, we don't do that anymore. You know, if you open Moodle for the first time and somebody goes, it's the pencil, that's really all you need to be able to edit it. You know, you just need the pencil. And that's fundamentally different. So those organizations were separate, I think, inside of the institution for a very good reason 10 or 15 years ago. And now, when the technology and the pedagogy are coming so closely, and now if we're not talking about store and access, if we're talking about collaboration and creativity and all this stuff, then those things have to come together. They have to work sort of in tandem, or actually not even in tandem, they become the same thing, right? Is it all about the technology? No, but the technology has an implicit, affordances that impact what you can do with it, right? So that, I mean, the simple answer is they have to come together, right? But that presents a whole other slew of challenges, right? Not just because they live in different buildings, but I mean, we have the same struggle right now. We try to put a committee on top of it, we try to deal with it, we try to come up with a workflow that helps people do it, but at some point, we're all gonna have to rethink what we're about and how we're gonna make that change. So if we're changing from store and access to collaboration, fundamental difference in how we have to work together. Bye.
Great, well, thank you very much.
Cheers.
And also, while we have all of you here, I'd like to mention that we are at Victoria going to be the host for Ed Media 2013, which is a conference that will be at the end of June next year. So I will be co-chair, and Alec Couros, who was mentioned in Dave's presentation, will also be co-chair. Pardon me?
He's the lazy professor.
He's the lazy professor. So we'll have a wonderful opportunity for great ed tech community building here and sharing in June. And I hope we can get you out here for that as well. Great. Thank you so much.